Welcome to the capability dimension of execute and deliver. This dimension is all about ensuring that the right environment is created for your learners so that engagement happens and learning outcomes are achieved. One of the capabilities that sits within this dimension is facilitate learning. As fellow learning professionals, I'm sure you'd agree that we put a lot of time and energy into designing and developing our learning sessions. And so it makes sense that we spend just as much time ensuring that we execute our plan perfectly. And that's what my session today is all about. So welcome to Facilitate Learning. Facilitate and learning, two of my most favourite words. And look, when you put them together, hey, magic happens, learning happens. And who doesn't like to learn? I know I do. And yet it wasn't always like that. In fact, I used to be a pretty poor learner, or at least I believed I was a poor learner. I was educated in England and I really didn't like school. School and Sally did not get on. I was led to believe that I wasn't a good learner and teachers didn't like me very much. I spent most of my time in the headmaster's office and I'd get report cards, and the report cards would say things like, Sally could do better if only she applied herself. Did any of you get one of those? I got several. And yet, the sad thing is I thought that I was applying myself because the way that I like to learn is to get really involved. And it's important for me to discuss and talk things through. And so quite often, I would be found at the back of the classroom having a little chat with the person next to me. And quite often I was actually talking about what the teacher was, explaining. And yet it always led to, Sally, you're disrupting the class, get outside. School and Sally really didn't get on. And I attribute it largely to the way that the teachers were with me. They didn't necessarily embrace the way that I liked to think and the way that I liked to learn. I can remember very significantly a time when I was in the headmaster's office and he said to me, Sally, you need to think very seriously about where you're heading in life. Because the way I see it, Sally, you're a poor learner. And quite honestly, you're not going to eventuate to anything in life. Yeah, I know, he actually said that. It's hard to believe, isn't it? But you know what? I believed him. I truly believed that I was a useless learner and that I'd never be able to study. And so when it came to leaving school, and my goodness, I couldn't wait to get out. But when it came to leaving school, I knew that I needed to take a job that meant absolutely no study because I wasn't very good at it. And so I ended up in a psychiatric care home. And no, I wasn't an inmate. I ended up as a carer and I loved it. I felt like, hey, this is what I want to be when I grow up, a nurse. So I did that for a little while and until I realized that to progress in nursing meant that I needed to go to university. And knowing that I was not very good at studying, well, that wasn't an option. And so basically, I felt like my world was being torn apart. This was a career that I loved and I can't continue because I can't study. And as luck would have it, around about this time, I met my now husband. He was an Australian in the UK on holidays, and basically he brought me back here to Sydney as a souvenir of his trip. And that was about 30 years ago. So when I got here, I needed a job and I got a job in a shop, a big shop, Maya, or Grace Brothers it was called at the time. I was put into the personnel department. And very quickly, the store manager came up to me and he said, Sally, I've been watching you and you're great with people and I've got a proposition for you and I hope that you say yes. Don't you just love it when someone says that to you? You almost feel obligated to say yes, don't you? Anyway, so I said, okay, what's that then? And he said, well, we're changing the way that leaders in the organisation build their capabilities. And as such, we want them to drive their own learning. But we're not going to leave them without any tools. What we've been doing is working with some great learning specialists. And we've come up with this 2-day program all about learning. And we want you to facilitate it. What do you say? Well, you can imagine, can't you? In my head, I'm thinking, learning? I can't even do that myself. How can I possibly teach other people to do it? And then I'm thinking, facilitating, that means teaching. And whoa, I know what I used to do to my teachers, and I'm not having any of that, thank you very much. But it was the store manager, and you wanted to please the store manager. And so I said, yeah, okay, I'll give it a go. That was the best decision I ever made, because off I went on an extensive train the trainer program. It spanned across 3 months. And during that time, I learned so much about how people learn and how to teach or train. I also learned that I wasn't dumb, stupid, couldn't learn, and or that I wouldn't eventuate to anything in life. I learned that my style of thinking was quite unique. And in some situations, it's really great. And in other situations, it's not so great. And so it's about getting that adaptability. So I learned about different thinking styles and different ways to learn, strategies to accelerate the way that I learn, certainly some skills in facilitation. And I came out of that 3 month program ready to go. And off we went to train 12,500 leaders in this program, all about learning to learn. It was a fantastic program. I can remember one day standing at the front of the room thinking to myself, you know what? It's really important to me that I'm credible when I'm in front of a group. And how can I possibly be credible when I'm talking about learning and yet I can't really learn myself? I believed in these strategies though. I knew that the strategies worked. So I thought time has come. It's time to go back to school. And that's exactly what I did. So first of all, I did a TAFE course. It was workplace training and assessment. And I blitzed it. I got 9 straight A's. Never had an A before in my life. And then I tried the ultimate. I said, okay, if I can do TAFE, I can do university. So off I went and did a Bachelor of Adult Education, and I blitzed it. I got distinctions. And it wasn't that I studied hard. I mean, yeah, I did study. I mean, obviously, those of us that have been to university know there's a fair amount of study, but I didn't find it difficult. And the reason I didn't find it difficult was that I understood my own learning process. I understood how to maximize my learning, how to accelerate it. And so consequently, study felt easy for me. I now make my career out of helping people to learn and training trainers to train. I've been doing this gig now for almost 30 years. Along the way, I've made many, many mistakes, and I've had some great learnings about what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing when you're facilitating in front of a group. I've come up with what I'm going to call my 7 shifters. These are changes or shifts that I needed to make to my own facilitation style that actually shifted the amount of engagement and learning that happened in a room. And so today I'm going to be sharing 7 of my shifters with you. Let's get going. The first shifter I've just role modeled to you. It's a key communication tool, great for business and really good when teaching or training others. It's called ETR. ETR stands for Earn the Right, and it's the way that we earn the right to share our messages with our listeners. So for instance, have you ever been to a meeting or a training session and from the moment that the trainer started to speak, you felt a connection with them? You had instant respect for what they had to say. And then as they continued their introduction and maybe shared with you a little bit about their experiences or their qualifications, you started to feel that you were absolutely in the right hands in terms of the learning you were about to undergo. They'd made a great first impression. They'd earned the right. Your ETR is your introduction to the group or the person you're communicating with. It's what you say in the first 5 or so minutes. It's said that the first 5 minutes of a presentation will have the most impact. It's here that we make it or break it. It's here that the right to train or the right to communicate is earned. Your ETR aims to achieve 2 things: establishing credibility and building rapport. A well-structured ETR consists of 3 core elements. So first things first, it's important for the listener to know who you are. So here you would include your name and your role, your tenure in your role, or your tenure as a facilitator, whichever is the more credible. Next comes the what. This is about sharing your skills, knowledge, and experience. It's about what you bring to the group and the session. So share with the group what experience you have with the content. So for example, if you're taking a session on company values, for instance, it may be that you were instrumental in designing values for a company, or that you've seen the effects of a business that has had solid values in place. Share your relevant tertiary qualifications. Not too many though. You don't want to be seen as being over credible and scare them off, just those that are relevant to the session that you're taking. And share what learning your session can bring to the group, what they're going to get out of it. Share, what did you get out of learning the content when you were introduced to it? Next comes the how. This is about the way in which you impart the information. It's about bringing the real you into the room. If you're a naturally humorous person, then include humour. If you've got an interesting personal story that links to your topic, then tell it. Don't overdo the storytelling though. Keep it to the topic or the subject and make it relevant. Try to choose one good story rather than a series of small stories. An ETR should be no more than 8 minutes long. So there we have it, the basic structure for a powerful introduction that builds both credibility and rapport. An introduction that highlights who you are, what your session has to offer, and how experienced you are to teach it. I role modelled my ETR to you at the start of the session, and I can tell you that particular story has been serving me well for way over 25 years. I use it all the time. It's what I call my industrial strength ETR. This next shifter is really significant to me because it's all about embracing our true self. When I first started out in training, I used to research facilitators that I liked, watch a lot of facilitators that I liked, and the ones that used to capture my attention were ones that used really sophisticated language and, really smart words. They'd string their words together. They were almost like a melody when they spoke. And I used to think they sounded really smart. And I believed that to be a credible facilitator, you needed to use sophisticated language. And so I made it my mission to go about learning sophisticated language and using it in my presentations. Now, if I'm honest, I'm a fairly simple person. I use simple language. I use very simple language. And so that wasn't an easy task for me to do. But I can remember I had an opportunity. I was presenting a mentoring program to a group of senior executives, and I'd started to put together my frames and my segues and preparing the session. And so I added in lots of sophisticated language. To be honest, I probably didn't know what half the words meant. I had Googled them though to make sure that they were in context. And I added them into my segues and to my frames. I'd written copious notes and I went to the session with a whole bunch of mind maps. And I found that I was really relying on those mind maps and that I was, almost reading from them at times. And I can remember a participant said to me at one point, "Sally, what did you mean by that?" And of course, they were referring to a word that I'd used. And you know what? I actually didn't know. But what I did know was that old trick. What does the rest of the group think that I meant by that word? And thankfully, someone in the group jumped up and answered it. Now, I can remember at the end of that session getting some feedback. And one piece of feedback said, "We don't think that we saw the real Sally today." And that hit home. It made me realize the importance of authenticity. And that's the next shifter. We all have our own communication strengths, and this is based on our unique set of life experiences, ideas, attitude, and knowledge. No other facilitator is quite like you. You bring your own style to the training environment. And it's important that you rock that style, that you own that style, and that you embrace everything about what is truly you. If you try to be someone that you're not, you're going to slip up, and people are going to see through a mask. And then trust is lost And when trust is lost, so too is credibility. People are going to switch off listening to someone that they don't believe to be credible. And when that happens, learning doesn't. So don't copy styles, rock your own. Don't use language that isn't yours or words that you wouldn't normally use. If presenting material that someone else has written, then rewrite the frames and the content to suit your language. Just make sure that you stick to the intent, obviously. Your style isn't going to be to everyone's liking, and that's okay. So lose the mask and bring to the room your humor. Bring your language, bring your intelligence, bring your quirkiness, bring your sass, bring your calm, bring your crazy. But above everything else, bring the most important thing. Bring you. So far, we've discovered 2 shifters. It's time to reflect now and to consider what these mean to us. Grab a piece of paper and a pen and take a moment now to answer the questions on screen. You have 2 minutes or until the music finishes. Thank you for completing the reflection. You'll have an opportunity to discuss your responses in the open forum at the end of the session. Let's move on now to our next shifter. The third significant shifter was the realization that the room was a stage, but I wasn't the star. The spotlight should always be on learning and helping the learners to become the stars, helping them to excel at activities, helping them to grasp concepts, helping them to answer questions, and helping them to integrate the information so that they can apply it back into the workplace. So the focus should always be on the learning and the learning that needs to occur. And that should shine above everything else. So for me, at times that meant that I needed to shrink into the background a little bit, not necessarily always be the font of all knowledge, not be the comedian or the show pony, if you like. Don't answer all of the questions, but rather facilitate answers from the individuals. And that way they learn and they remember. So your role is to facilitate learning. And at times that might mean that, yes, you do bring in a bit of the actor factor, but at the end of the day, learning is what needs to happen, and learning should be where your focus is. Okay, this next shifter totally revolutionized the way that I approach facilitation. It's a concept that was taught to me by the late Sylvia Downs. She was a wonderful woman. She had such a wealth of knowledge on learning and in particular building understanding. And over a cream tea one afternoon in the UK, she and I, among other things, talked about this concept. And it really helped me to understand the difference between training and facilitation. And it was a bit of a slap in the face for me, if I'm honest, because it made me realize that things that I'd been doing up to that point had potentially been detrimental to learning, or at least the rate at which people learn. So I'm going to share this concept with you now. And I must add, Sylvia did give me permission to on-share this concept. And over the years, I might have morphed it and added a bit to it. So you're getting a bit of a hybrid. But let's have a look at the concept now. How many of you have approached teaching a concept a little like this? You start with a frame and you talk through the whats and the whys of the concept. And then you go into the detail, where you might share some examples or a story or two. After which you go into an activity and you get the group practicing the concept. Following that, you go into debrief, and that's where you might highlight the key points. And then perhaps you might run a quiz or test their learning somehow. And after that, you then get some group involvement and you invite questions. Anyone done that? If anything, that's the traditional model of training, isn't it? And there's nothing really wrong with that. But how can you actually tell if the group has learned? How can you truly test if they understand? Quite simply, you can't. And who was doing all the work? How much input did the learners have? I used to treat my learners like they were empty vessels and follow that exact model, feeling like I needed to fill them up. But let's now look at filling the vessel versus topping up the vessel. The learners in the room come with a wealth of knowledge and experience. Why wouldn't you use that? Why not flip this on its head and start with what they already know? So once you've introduced the concept, throw it straight to the group. Get individuals to reflect on what they already know about the topic. Then perhaps get them to share with a partner, thus building their knowledge further. Then get the pairs to share their knowledge with the group, further building their knowledge, adding to what they already know. And when all ideas are exhausted, that's when you come in and just top up the gaps in the knowledge. How good is that? The group collectively build their knowledge and you facilitate the process. That's true facilitation. When you step back from being the font of all knowledge, it's amazing how many experts are already in the room. So that's my fourth shifter. Learners are experts. Use their knowledge to their own advantage. Okay, this next shifter is one that I'd recommend that anyone that's starting out in facilitation absolutely uses. This as your staple. As a learning specialist, I think it's really important that we actually understand as much as we can about learning and the process of learning and how people retain information, how they take in information, how they process information. And so I absolutely made it my mission to learn as much as I could about the brain and learning. And without wanting to overcomplicate things and not going into a neuroscience lesson, there are absolutely some things that you can do when you're facilitating that play to the brain and that tune in to the way that a person thinks and processes information. And if you can play to the brain when you're facilitating, then ultimately learning will happen. So let's look at some ways that we can do that. Play to the brain by making things relevant. When things are relevant, we connect with them. When we connect with something and we can see how it benefits us, then we're more open to listening and to the learning. So it's important to frame the relevance of the topic, how it can help your participants back in the workplace, how they can use this to speed up processes or simplify the workload, etc. Play to the brain by moving from known to new. Making connections is how the brain learns. When connections are made, that's often when we have those aha moments. And to aid this process, it's good to start from a place that is familiar to the group and then build on that knowledge gradually. So start from a place of common understanding. Play to the brain by using patterns. The brain is a pattern-seeking device. It loves patterns. It's how it connects. Patterns are repetitive, and repetitiveness assists retention. So think about what patterns you can include when designing your session flow, or what patterns you can create in your learning materials. Play to the brain through storytelling. Storytelling was how our forefathers shared information. Stories are memorable. I bet you can all remember your favourite story from your childhood or a funny story that someone told you once. Where possible, use stories and analogies to aid the learning process. Personal stories are really powerful, as are well-known stories. Just always ensure the stories you tell are relevant and linked to the topic that you're discussing. Right, I know you know this next one because it's the #1 learning strategy. Play to the brain through chunking. That's all about breaking up the content into bite-sized pieces, not too big so as to overwhelm and not too small that it becomes a bore. Bit by bit makes up the whole puzzle and helps with connecting the new information to the known information. And play to the brain through reflection and integration. The brain needs time to integrate the learning. Providing reflection time is important. So reflect as much as you can. At the end of each chunk, at the end of each day, and if it's a 2-day program, reflect again the next morning once the learners have had time to integrate. And because reflection and integration is so important, let's do that now. If you could once again grab your paper and your pen and answer the questions that come up on the screen. You'll have 3 minutes or until the music stops. Thank you for completing the reflection. You'll have an opportunity to share your thoughts in the open forum shortly. So far, we've discussed strategies to ensure you positively impact the group and get them on board from the onset. We've also explored ways to ensure that learning is the focus and ultimately the outcome. Let's now turn our attention to the learners themselves and some of their needs and how we can facilitate towards those needs. You know, it takes courage for participants to contribute to a training session. And when they do contribute, they like to have those contributions validated. They like to know if they were right. And so celebrating success is really, really important. It needs to be done in the right way, though, because it can also be very detrimental if done incorrectly. Now, I used to be like a soccer mum when someone got the correct response or what I was looking for. And I'd be like, yes, well done. Absolutely fantastic, John. That's spot on. That's exactly what I was looking for. Or, oh, Ahmed, that's brilliant. What a great idea that is. And then when people didn't necessarily get exactly what I was looking for, I'd still celebrate the success. But I'd say something like, yeah, good, Claire. Or, nice idea. Yeah, we could give that a go, couldn't we? So what do you think these different responses are doing to people? How do you think John's feeling? Well, hey, he's probably feeling pretty great because I told him it was fantastic, it was spot on, and what a great idea. But what about Claire? Claire got told that she was good. Would Claire want to contribute again? Maybe, maybe not. I now use the same response for absolutely everybody when they're contributing. And that response is very simply, thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you, Claire. Additionally, I always try to add value to a participant's response to highlight why and how their contribution was correct. So imagine I was running a brainstorm and asked for all the elements that are important when approaching customers. And John yelled out, a smile. I would add value by saying something like, thank you, John. Yes, a smile is important, isn't it? It helps to build rapport and show our customers that we're approachable. Learners at times might demonstrate that they don't understand something, and it can come across as being disengaged. So they might challenge you, they might stare blankly at you, they might chat to the person next to them, they might be a bit disruptive, they might be doodling on their notepad or looking out of the window. These are all indications that they're not necessarily understanding or getting what it is that you're asking. And it can be very easy for us as facilitators to blame the group or blame the individual and say things like, oh, that group, they just didn't want to be here. They just weren't engaged. They weren't listening. Hey, they were talking to each other all the time. And it can be very easy for us to do that, just blame the group. And yet, who's responsible for that behavior? Is it the individual or the group? No, it's you as the facilitator. There's something that you did or didn't do that wasn't connecting the dots for the individual, that wasn't helping them to build that understanding, and consequently, they behaved in that way. So let's look at that now and our very last shifter for this session. Shifter number 7, forget the blame game. When you find yourself in a situation where a participant isn't behaving or contributing in ways that you'd like, take a moment to stop and reflect on what you may or may not be doing that might have caused that behaviour. And ask yourself, did I provide enough context? Do I perhaps need to reframe the question? Am I incorporating the right amount of energy and warmth for the topic? Do I need to switch things up a little? How is my pace? Am I rushing? Am I going too slow? Have I pitched my language or the content correctly for the group? Have I been checking in with the group periodically to check on their understanding? Quite simply, if you don't get the response that you want, then you need to do something else until you do. That concludes my 7 shifters and today's session. Thanks for coming on the virtual journey with me. Let's take a moment now to reflect on what we've covered by answering the questions on screen. And I'll see you live for a chat shortly.